Good afternoon. It's nice to meet you all. It's nice to be on the West Coast. I grew up on the prairies, but I did attend the University of British Columbia. Did my undergrad there, so it's been a while since I've been back through this part of Canada, but it's nice to be here. I'm going to start off my talk today with just a little bit of background about myself, and then move into what I hope to be the main part of today's discussion, which is looking at the upcoming United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, the conference that will be held in Japan in October, from October 18th to the 29th. So just a little bit of background on myself, and then I'll move into the actual topic itself. As I said, I attended the University of British Columbia. I started off as a Japanese language major, and in late 1980s, actually 1988, I went to the University of Kumamoto in Japan as a Ministry of Education scholarship student. At that time, there was a scholarship for a student specifically from the University of British Columbia, who could go and study for a year as an undergrad at the University of Kumamoto. So I went there in the late 1980s, which, as you all know, was the bubble economy of Japan was still booming, and everybody's looking at many people who were, at least people around who I had contact with, who were going to Japan at that time, were very interested in the so-called Japanese economic miracle. How did Japan achieve what it did in post-World War II era? I was interested in what Japan had achieved, but I was also very interested in what Japan had lost. I'm a firm believer that that life always balances itself out. So if you gain something, you also lose something. So in 1988, when I went to Kumamoto University, I became involved in Japanese folklore, ethnology, and went into the countryside to collect oral histories. I was focusing on artisans of the 20th century, those who had been born at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. And I was interested in collecting their life histories and really focusing on how the economic and the social changes of 20th century Japan had impacted the rural culture, livelihoods, and by focusing on the artisans, bamboo artisans, blacksmiths who hadn't mechanized, coopers, they make the wooden tubs, and those artisans. And so I spent 3 years. I was only going to do this for 1 year, and ended up being there for 3 years, collecting the life histories of artisans. I moved from Kumamoto up to Nagano Prefecture, and was at a Japanese publishing company that had a school of ethnology, Japanese folklore. So I went from there and just continued working. I eventually graduated from university, and then started working at the Japanese publishing company as a Canadian writer in Japanese. Initially, my Japanese wasn't so good, but since then I've published 13 books in Japanese, and was very fortunate to meet some wonderful editors. And although I was working on the publishing side, it also brought me in contact with a lot of academics in Japan. And because I was focusing on rural community issues, and there weren't a lot of people doing that in the early 1990s, when my first book came out, that was a collection of these oral histories. The Japanese National Government of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries contacted me in 1993 and asked if I would like to become a member of various national government committees. And the first one of which was, and it continues today, which is an oddity in Japanese government committees. It was established in 1994, and it was the National Committee for Promoting Environmentally Sound Agricultural Practices. And we designed the guidelines for environmentally sound agriculture, and have gone on from there to develop a certificate program for farmers, the Eco Farmer Certificate Program. And it's a fascinating committee because it was one of the first committees in Japan that took the multi-stakeholder approach. So it brought together farmers, researchers, local, regional, national policymakers, consumer interest groups, media, people in education, and brought us all together. And we designed the criteria together, and we've taken it beyond our belief. The belief of the committee is saying we have to bring all the different interest groups together. That environmentally sound agriculture, forestry, fisheries is not just the sole responsibility of those in the field. It's a social issue, and we all have to come together. So I've been working on these issues since 1994 in Japan, and it's very exciting to be part of that. So in 2007, when the United Nations University, which has its headquarters, for the global headquarters are in Japan, in Tokyo, when they started looking for somebody who could speak, read, and write in Japanese and had an actual understanding of the field, as well as research and policy in Japan on forestry, fisheries, and agriculture, they approached me to be the founding director of a regional research office that they were going to establish in Kanazawa, Ishikawa Prefecture. So I said yes. It sounded like a wonderful opportunity to take the work that I had been doing in Japan and work with not only Japanese researchers and policymakers, but take that to a global forum as well, and work on different levels, which is always exciting. So I said yes to this, and my first job as the director was to attend the Convention on Biological Diversity, the 9th COP, which was in Bonn, Germany in May 2008. So that sets the stage for today's talk. So I just need to go through here. Before 2008, though, although I've been based in the Japanese countryside for most of my time in Japan, in Miyagi Prefecture, Nagano Prefecture, one of my projects has been working with the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries and the National Museum of Ethnology in Osaka, and trying to record the lifestyles and the fishing methods and practices of coastal communities in Japan. So since 1998 until 2008, with a photographer, I traveled from northern Hokkaido in this car through Japan. Sometimes I'd get on fishing boats and to talk to people. So I've traveled 80% of the coastal regions of Japan, from Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, Kyushu. So I've seen a lot of the field. Now it's trying to work with field researchers, field practitioners, local policymakers, and taking what's done in the field and the challenges of the field to national and global levels. And the opportunity with that arose with United Nations University and going to Bonn and talking about Satoyama. In Bonn, at COP10 for the Convention on Biological Diversity, Japan held what's known as a side event, where they introduced the Satoyama concept. And they introduced the concept with the intent of having this developed into what they now call the Satoyama Initiative, which would be proposed at COP10 Nagoya, when Japan was hosting the convention's meetings in 2010, this October. So first of all, I just want to look at, defining Satoyama. Some of you who are familiar with Japan, if you hear the word Satoyama, you say, I know what that means. Sato, that's village. Yama, that's town. That means a mountain, rural mountain community. And written record, this is a Ministry of Environment. This is a visual of what Satoyama means. So you have, we'll go to the definitions, the written definitions after this, but I want you to have a visual of how the government is presenting this, where you have your secondary forests, you have your rice paddies, you have community, and within there, and it's a high level of human interaction with the natural environment, and Japanese ecologists, through their studies, have come to show that a true Satoyama model, where you have intensive labor in managing the forests and the farmlands in that rural environment, we're calling them socio-ecological production landscapes, that if you have this high level of human interaction and management, then it actually contributes to higher levels of biodiversity. So they're trying to take this to the global stage, that by removing humans from a landscape that has been managed over many centuries, that by removing that, you actually are contributing to environmental degradation. So it's always maintaining that human factor in an environment, that because of human interaction, that doesn't lead to degradation, as we often think of. Exploitation is on one end, but if you take out human interaction altogether, you actually arrive at the other end, which is undermanagement, underuse, which leads to a different type of environmental degradation. So it's a new approach to looking at how much or how little human interaction, management approaches. It's bringing a new approach, and they're saying that this has been traditional in Japan in the Satoyama landscapes. So they've revived a concept and are trying to bring it back. But you can't just bring a concept and say, oh, this was the way we used to do it, we think it's really good, and the Japanese ecologists are saying that it contributes to biodiversity. You need a little bit, you need studies in Japanese or in English to take to the global audience to describe this. So in Bonn, many people said, oh, that Satoyama concept is wonderful. It sounds very interesting, where you're trying to approach resource use management practices, approaches, that adds a cultural element. So you're really looking at cultural, biocultural diversity, not just diversity from a very scientific approach. It's a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approach to resource use and management. People said that's really wonderful, but we're just not getting the whole thing of it. We need it in terms that Western scientists and policymakers understand a little bit more before we give it our nod of approval at COP10 in Nagoya. So my institution, United Nations University, has been working with the Japanese Ministry of Environment to increase, to give the scientific substance and also the social science substance to this Satoyama concept, so that it will be more easily adopted at COP10 in Nagoya. And for the last 2 years, Japan has been carrying out, under the leadership of UNUIS, which is United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies, has led what we refer to as the Satoyama Satoumi Sub-Global Ecosystem Assessment. This is actually under the umbrella of the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. And so it's looking at Satoyama, Satoumi. Satoumi is the marine counterpart of Satoyama. It's looking at Satoyama and Satoumi through ecosystem services, so that it's in language. We've reviewed the last 50 years, or assessed the last 50 years of Satoyama, Satoumi landscapes in Japan, which actually are 40% of the national land area. And it's been, it was divided into 4 clusters. The 4 clusters put their findings together. We finalized the findings in January of this year. They were taken to a national writing group, and now the national group has written a national report, and that will be presented at COP10. So this is giving the scientific substance to a concept that they want to take and have accepted. Because of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I will leave this, but it's just going through the Satoyama concept. The first time we see it in written text in Japan is in 1759 by a forest manager, and it was revived actually in the 1960s. And I think part of it was by Dr. Shide, and in some ways it was his and others' reaction to westernization of Japan and the time, saying that, you know, development doesn't have to follow just a Western way, that why don't we look at some of our traditional ways of Japan, and can we not combine them better with the Western ways that we're bringing in here. But this was a very small group of people, of forest ecologists who were part of this movement led by Dr. Shide from the 1960s on. And it doesn't really catch momentum, I think, and this is a personal opinion, until the 1990s, and then more so in recent years, where I think Japan's saying, well, we've achieved a lot, but what were the trade-offs in all of this? And could we have been better integrators of our traditional knowledge with modern science? And I think that it's in other areas, not just the environmental side as well, but it's this, I find that over the last 10 years you see more people saying, well, what was a traditional way, and how do we combine that better with modern ways? So that's just what I was trying to say there, but right now the Japanese government is defining Satoyama for global dialogues as dynamic socio-ecological coupled production system comprising of a mosaic of different ecosystem types, producing a synergy of a bundle of ecosystem services for human well-being. That's very long, it's very difficult, and it might go well with ecologists and others who are familiar with this kind of vocabulary, but more people are right now working with socio-ecological production landscapes, and even then it has to get explained a little. But I think it's a way of looking at integrating traditional approaches with using modern contemporary scientific approaches. But this is what it is visually. So I showed you maybe the order wasn't so good there, but you had the Ministry of the Environment's illustration, and this is out where I am working with researchers in Noto Peninsula. So I think they do exist, even in the field. But one of the big issues here is that a lot of who I call the managers or the ecosystem stewards are an aging population. So I don't want to confuse today's talk, but Satoyama Initiative is that's being taken to COP10 is an attempt by the Japanese government to have included in the Convention on Biological Diversity the Satoyama Initiative, which supports resource use management approaches that integrate traditional approaches with the ecosystem, the very scientific approach. But when we look at what's happening in Japan, one of the things in Japan is that those who live in Satoyama areas are your aging population. So the future, the Satoyama Initiative, I think will go on and develop into a very interesting global forum on its own. But in Japan, I'm a member of the National Government's Committee for Satoyama Conservation and Management. And one of our big issues is we looked at 600 Satoyamas from around Japan over the last 2 years. And a lot of these areas are the average population, the average age is over 70. So we're saying, okay, right now they're being managed, but what's going to happen in 10 years from now? And that's a big challenge within Japan nationally. So the Satoyama discussion sometimes we have to say, okay, there's the Satoyama discussion happening within Japan, and then there's the Satoyama Initiative discussion, which is what they're taking to the global. And I think one of the challenges is how are you going to bring them together so that you don't have to always talk about them separately. But to get back to the Satoyama Initiative, this is from the Sato Initiative homepage, and if you go to this URL, you will walk into a beautiful page that's been put up, and it talks about the Satoyama Initiative. And as I said, in Bonn, at COP10 in Bonn, the Satoyama concept was introduced to the global audience, and then people came back to Japan and said, okay, now we need to get some of the science behind all of this, and make it a more robust initiative. And through that process, they were working with Japanese researchers and policymakers, but they also said, you know, we also need some international advisors for this, to just sound this off, to see if when we do actually take it and have it proposed at COP10 Nagoya, we want to make sure that it's adopted. So we want to make sure that the global audience will actually support this. The other part, the convention, the other parties, 193 of them, will actually accept this. So it's been a very interesting few years since COP9 in Bonn, where you have national meetings, regional, national, and international meetings, and having international experts come in and advise Japan on how to maybe work, reword some of this, or what some of the weaknesses of it is. So a lot of this wording here has come from meetings from May 2008 up until actually very recently, to get people to work together on the approach and the perspectives. I'll just leave this up here because looking at my watch, I'm running out of time, so I need to hurry myself up and get to COP10 a little bit. But before I do that, the Satoyama Initiative was globally launched in January 2009. Or no, what am I saying? January 2010. I'm losing my years here. So this year it was globally launched in Paris. And it was also launched around the same time as the United Nations International Year of Biological Diversity, and there was a lot of talk about COP10 Nagoya, and it was a very, excuse the term, it was a very feel-good session at the launch. Everybody was very happy, it's a new year, we're going to have some wonderful things happen during the year. And Japan felt very confident with their Satoyama Initiative in January. They felt that they had a very receptive global audience. Then they went to what's known as SBSTA. And SBSTA, as you may or may not know, is a subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this was held in Nairobi in May, and that's where scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered. And Japan once again presented the Satoyama Initiative, saying that we are going to take this to COP10 Nagoya, and we hope that it will be adopted there. Well, they didn't receive the same reception as in Paris. There were many critical voices. What is this? What's the science of this? Japan, are you saying that you're unique, that you're different than the rest of us? You have something special that we don't have, and yet we have a lot of traditional wisdom and knowledge, and it's not only Japan. And Japan had been working on this since a session in July 2009, where they said, you have to find partners in the Satoyama Initiative. So Korea, Indonesia, India, Italy had joined in the partnership, and they were the Japanese Ministry of the Environment spent a lot of money going around and developing case studies from around the world of potential Satoyama partnerships where you would have what they call Satoyama-like landscapes in other countries around the world. But they hadn't brought the partnership very much together in a very strong way that they could ride the waves of some of the criticism in Nairobi in May. So Japan came back, and some of my colleagues said, oh, geez, we've got a lot of homework to do before COP10, because it looks like Japan might not be able to get this through at the Satoyama Initiative just will not fly at COP10 Nagoya. And some of us said, well, but Japan's the host country, they'll get it through. And the Convention on Biological Diversity also, now the convention's magazine, their journal, is called Satoyama. So there's a lot of support from the convention to have this initiative adopted as well. But that's still, you know, despite that side of it, that, yeah, Japan is a host country, adoption chances are probably better when they are host than if they're not host. But still, you want the science there. You want to be able to have everybody there. And one of the leading critics was actually some of the countries in South America. And this is when you're looking at many of you who have looked at other UN conventions and the debates that go on and the negotiations. One country wants one initiative to be adopted and another country wants another initiative to be adopted, or something deleted or something added. There's intense negotiations always. And so we have ABS, access benefit sharing. And this is a very important issue for many of the developing countries. And Brazil has been one of the leading voices on this. So in some ways, not everybody will agree with this. This is a personal observation. But the Japanese government wants Satoyama initiative to be adopted. Other countries want other initiatives. And so you're seeing this very delicate but interesting informal negotiation taking place over the last few months. And actually last month, on September the 22nd, there was a Satoyama Initiative exploratory partnership workshop in South America on the 22nd, and on the September the 29th, at the United Nations headquarters, there was a high-level biological diversity meeting in preparation for Nagoya. So now the question is will the initiative be adopted in Nagoya? I was at the, last week I spent in Montreal, which is where the Secretariat for the Secretariat for the Convention of Biological Diversity is located. And we had some discussions about the meetings in Brazil, in New York, and what do you think is going to happen in October in Nagoya. And many people are feeling very confident again that the science has improved. Those who were critical are less critical, and I think Japan has done a better job of saying that it's not just unique to Japan. Japan is exploring how to combine their traditional approaches to resource use and management with modern day science. But Korea might have a different approach, and Peru might have a different approach. And we want to bring all these different possible combinations of integrative approaches to resource use and management that contribute to putting a brake on biodiversity loss. And we want to work together. So I think Japan has done, I would say, they've had a very busy 2 years. But they've done a very good job of taking this initiative from something that was started off as something kind of local, maybe a little insular in some ways, inward looking, and taking it to a global audience, and this had engaged global experts and other policymakers. And they've done a good job on this, because sometimes I don't think Japan has always been good on this, where when somebody criticizes something, it's a protective mechanism that gets lit up, and there's a shutdown sometimes. But they've been very good this time with opening up the discussions and listening to the criticism, and then trying to say, how do we work with this? How do we improve what we're doing here so that we have more partners on the international scene? And I think this says that, okay, after COP10, one of the big questions right now is, how effective will Japan be? Because Japan will host the presidency of this convention for 2 years, from 2010 to 2012, before it goes to India. India will be the next host of COP11. So Japan has 2 years of leadership ahead of her. And there's people who are saying, does Japan have the expertise? Does it have the sophistication? Can it be an effective president of the convention? And so I think of it as environmental diplomacy, but Japan has matured a lot. As an aside, I worked from 1999 to 2007. I was one of the members of the Japanese Ministry of the Environment's government review team for Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change meetings. And when I started in 1999, I thought Japan had a little ways to go in global environmental negotiations, of getting their voice out there and have people listen to them. But I think Japan has matured a bit, and it might be an interesting next 2 years. The Satoyama Initiative will go on, but another initiative that actually I'm a part of is looking at oceans. 70% of the globe is the ocean. So if we're talking about global biodiversity, we really also need to be looking at our oceans. And so for the last 6 months, I've been working with researchers in Japan to compile case studies from Hokkaido all the way down to Okinawa to look at Japanese coastal community marine resource use management practices. And we put this under Sato Umi, not Satoyama. Sato is, again, it's a village, community. Umi is ocean. So looking at the marine equivalent of Satoyama. And we've been asked to put together a technical report for the CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity technical series. And this will be launched in October at COP10, and we will also be holding that will be a paperless launch, and the printed launch will come in Ishikawa, Kanazawa, where I have my base, at UN's official closing of the International Year of Biodiversity, which will be in Kanazawa in December. So we're trying to take global biodiversity agendas beyond the terrestrial focus that a lot of us have, and say, let's look at on-land issues, but let's also look at what's happening in our oceans. And so we will be chairing, my office, along with CBD Secretariat, will be chairing a meeting in Nagoya, which will try and look at how to maybe design some projects and programs that the Japanese government, when they are hosting the presidency for the convention on biological diversity for marine issues, and to link terrestrial with the marine.